Start now with a welcome to everybody. I see we've got 11 people online, and fortunately we have our presenter, Dr. Reuter, who I think most of you would know, if not personally, then at least at a distance, based in George, community-based education coordinator there, with a long history with various NGOs, including MSF and others, and has been with us since part-time with UCT since what, 2015, Hermann, 14, something like that, almost 10 years, my word. So welcome to that, and the topic and the title obviously is youth wellness and prevention, with a focus on alcohol abuse, drug and alcohol abuse, in which the Planet Youth Project is embedded. So we're looking forward to the bigger picture here, Hermann. So over to you. Thanks very much.
Can you see my slides?
We can see your slides. And can I just ask that people, if you want CPD points, if you could email Dehran Swart at uct.ac.za. It's in the chat. And there's the next seminar on 10th of October. So thanks for that, and over to you, Hermann.
Okay, thanks. So I don't know how many of you have already been in talks that either I or Dehran did about Planet Youth. So I wasn't quite sure how much of that to repeat and how much to go into new territory. But I'll just keep going and see where we go.
Well, I want to stop you at about 20 to 2 so that we have time for questions and answers.
Okay, thanks for that. So basically, when I think about harm reduction in terms of alcohol, I think about different aspects to it. The one is demand reduction. That is that people don't want to buy alcohol or drink alcohol. The other one is supply reduction, is to actually taking the alcohol away from people. And then treatment for those who are already drinking alcohol. And I'll see how far I can talk about these three aspects of harm reduction. And a very interesting experiment that you can do at home, if you go to a pet shop and buy some mice, and you give them water. The other water, you add some drugs. Opioids work well, morphine or so. The rat will taste both waters, and it will always go for the morphine and actually overdose on the morphine. And never mind which rat you put in there, they do the same. They go for the morphine and then overdose. However, if you put the same rats into a cage with other rats and with toys and with food, and they can play and have sex, and you put both the drugged water and the clear water into the cage, the rats will taste both waters, but they will always prefer the clear water, and not a single rat will overdose itself. These experiments were done by Prof. Alexander in Canada. They've been documented, and they kind of show how I understand addiction in our society. Is if you live in a cage where you're content, where you've got connections to other people, you don't see the need for using drugs. However, if you feel caged in with your trauma, you can't speak to anybody, you don't find solutions to your struggles, then drugs often become an escape to deal with the trauma. And thus, to create a safer environment, a safer community, Planet Youth looks at changing the community at homes, at schools, and in the community itself. So basically changing the environment in which people grow up in. And the United Nations publications on drug prevention and crime prevention all talk to this, that there's no use in talking to teenagers and tell them not to use drugs. It doesn't work. There's been lots of studies of different ways to share the information with youth, and it doesn't work. What works is changing the environment in which young people grow up in. And if you're not drinking as an adolescent, then you're much less likely to drink as an adult or to drink harmfully as an adult. And obviously, it's our responsibility as health workers to keep our community safe from alcohol, because alcohol causes so many health problems and social problems. So in Iceland, they started an intervention in 1998, which up to now has been the most successful intervention in terms of alcohol reduction in a community. If you look at the blue dots, that's a measure on a yearly basis of how many of their teenagers, 15 to 16-year-olds, get drunk on alcohol. When they started, 42% of them got drunk every month. And they managed to decrease that to 5%, 6%, where they're staying since then. When we saw this, when they published it in 2018, we immediately said we want this for South Africa. And I started working on it, presenting it to doctors in the hospital, to doctors in the primary healthcare, to my UCT colleagues. And this year, we finally managed to launch this program officially in George. In February, the mayor of George opened this ceremony, and we had all the different departments that need to collaborate: the municipality, education, health, social development, cultural affairs. We managed to get them all to meet on a monthly basis to discuss this program and, look for action. One of the early steps in the program is to get all the grade 8 and 9 learners to complete a survey, about 100 questions. On this picture, you see Dehran and Zilla North, the sub-district manager, then myself, and a Yebonia. The Yebonias are wellness champs that we've got at all the schools, paid by Department of Cultural Affairs and Sports, and they helped us a lot with these questionnaires, getting all the computers running during load shedding 6. So that was quite a challenge, but we managed to get 92% of all the learners to complete their questionnaires. The survey is a measure of what's happening in the community. It's not to give direct feedback to the young people. It's more to look at what does the cage look like for young people and how can we change that cage. So the intervention is towards the community, not towards the learners. Just a few statistics from our survey. So we surveyed 6,434 people, and slightly more girls than boys, and the main ages were 14 and 15-year-olds. I'll focus mainly on the alcohol on the middle. 38% of the learners have been drunk. Some schools it was over 50%, other schools it was less, but this is a George average of those 4,000 learners, after 6,000 learners that we questioned. You see on the right-hand side, you also see the nicotine use, mainly through Oka pipe, and also some marijuana dacha use. This just shows more about the nicotine use, and with this intervention in Iceland, they reduced the alcohol use and the nicotine use and the dacha use. So we're confident that we will do the same. This is cigarette smoking is going out of fashion, and e-cigarettes is starting to pick up and become more favorable. So the first column always shows if you've done it in your lifetime, the middle column in the last 30 days, and the one on the right is daily use. With alcohol, we've only got 2 columns. This is people who drank alcohol in their lifetime, 56%, and in the last 30 days, it was just over a quarter. Getting drunk in the last 30 days was 15%, which is much better than the Icelandic 42% with which they started off with. But nevertheless, 38% of these 14 and 15-year-old children have been drunk. Where do they get their alcohol? Mainly they buy it themselves at a bottle store, or they get it from schoolmates who also bought it at the bottle store, or they get it from a tavern, a shebeen, or another person outside their family gives it to them, and 13% actually gave it from their family. This is just, to see what messages we need to give to their parents. Where do we need to stop the supply if we want to work on stopping the supply? But more importantly is the demand reduction. What do we do that the young people don't want to consume alcohol? And we cross-tabulate it, looking at who are the kids that drink more and who are the kids that drink less. And I'm focusing just on the drunkenness. So those that were drunk in the past 30 days, if the parent have a strong reaction against alcohol, of those kids, only 12% reported getting drunk. Whereas those that reported that my parents don't care if I drink or not, 44% of them were drunk in the past month. So very, very significant difference where parents actually do have power and that children listen to their parents and their advice. Very strong evidence for that. Another indicator, if you hang out with people that get drunk, if your peers are drunk, your chance of having been drunk in the past 30 days is 40%. If you don't hang out with people that drink, then your chances are only 12% of getting drunk. So the importance of choosing peer groups. Being outside after 10 p.m. Those that were never outside after 10 p.m., 15% of them reported having been drunk. And those that stay outside after 10, 27% of them have reported that they were drunk in the past 30 days. So we're looking at these risk factors and the protective factors, and then we give feedback to the community, to the parents, to the teachers. We also look at the leisure time, looking at doing sports 4 times a week, 34% of boys and 19% of girls. So these are things that we want to increase, knowing that the more people are busy in the afternoon getting their joy through meaningful activities would protect them from substance use. And on the right, you see that 25% of the learners actually out after 10 p.m. And I just showed you that that is a risk factor for alcohol. These pictures just show report back meetings. The one on the left is actually to the MEC of Health. This was a pilot report that we had, and the new report we're now also planning to report back to all the directors of the health, of education, of social development. And on the right, you see the parent meeting at one of the high schools, where we then discuss with the parents how these reports make them feel and what they think they can do to improve the situation. Basically, we're encouraging to increase protective factors, doing more after school activities. In Iceland, they've got a leisure card where every teenager is allowed to spend 3,000 Rand on after school activities. I don't think we would have the money for that, but we're talking to our municipality at the moment if they could make bus trips free for young people, or if they could train a few coaches, or if they could give subsidies to people according to how many learners they keep busy after school. So we're looking at different ways of funding that learners get more opportunities to do as many activities of their choice that are supervised by parents. The other protective factor that we're working on is mental health of the teenagers. We're actually doing quite well in South Africa with sleep. And internationally, there's a strong correlation with the less the young people sleep, the more mental health problems they have. And we saw it also in our statistics. But apart from that, we live in a very traumatic society. Lots of young people face trauma. So we've placed at the moment 3 Yeboneers at all the high schools, and they provide counseling to learners during the day and after school activities in the afternoon. And the Year Beyond program is a Western Cape program. There's about 3,000 Yebuneers in the Western Cape at the moment, and there's scope to increasing that in Cape Town. So any program that wants to expand Planet Youth to Cape Town, I would highly recommend to work with the Year Beyond program. And I just wanted to get some feedback now. Steve, you wanted some discussion at the end, but perhaps you can already have one person from each department just mentioning what you would do in your department to support such a program.
You're paying your salary.
What you would pay my salary, Steve?
Yeah.
Okay. Is that for PhD? No, that's for face and a whole, but now I want each division to talk about it. I'm just trying to see who's on the talk.
Yeah, go for it, Dehran.
Yeah, Herman, as you pointed out, you know, leisure time, physical activities or other activities are inversely correlated with alcohol abuse. I think just as we promote physical activity in all ages to the benefit of those individuals from a physical and mental health perspective, I think it also continuing to try to improve physical activity participation in adolescents, especially since we see that adolescents generally have reduced physical activity over the course of the last few decades globally, and South Africa is also not you know, any different. So you know,
okay, and especially after this COVID lockdown, we see people do much less activities than before then.
As well,
okay.
That contributed to that. And
yeah,
I just wanted to ask a
from
question.
Another division?
Can I ask a question as well, Herman?
Yeah.
I mean, in terms of, and related to that, what do our stats show in terms of alcohol use in adolescents and socioeconomic status? I assume, obviously, that poor socioeconomic status is associated with a greater risk. But do we have stats for South Africa?
We looked at hunger, and the children that reported that they don't get enough meals had a much higher alcohol use than those that get every meal.
Okay.
And that obviously works both ways. On the one hand, a family where there's a lot of alcohol might not have, you know, enough food, but also if there's unemployment, just the stress of not having a meal at the end of the day, people use, you know, a substance to dim that. So that's the only socioeconomic factor that we assessed in this study. But it is significant that hunger.
And I mean, just one thing to add to my comment about physical activity is that we also have clear evidence that, you know, participating in physical activity improves lifestyle-related decision-making processes as well. So there's additional benefit there in terms of that.
When we ask youth why are you taking part in sport, quite a few say that they're hungry after school.
Sure.
And they need to get home to start cooking, or need to go home to start looking for bread or something.
Absolutely.
So providing better nutrition at schools would also increase the number of learners that participate in after-school activities.
Nutrition, access to safe environments to participate in sporting activity, and many other factors. So many factors.
Especially amongst girls, they talked about safety after sport.
Indeed.
You know, and the lack thereof. Yeah. Anyone from another division?
Isaac's hands up.
Isaac, are you speaking for PhD?
I can speak about what we've been doing in the PhD space. For sitting within the health promotion side, you know, we've had a lot of our activities, or a number of our student health promotion projects have been geared along kind of similar lines. Looking at issues around vaping and alcohol, but also a kind of physical activity, and we've had a number of different activities at different schools. So that is something that is happening. We are looking though at how we can make it more sustainable and more longitudinal. So we have long-term relationships with stakeholders, but we kind of go in and out, you know, as the blocks kind of allow us to do that. But there's another model that we're also looking at, and that is kind of a community engagement type of model, longitudinal community engagement model of where we look at certain stakeholders within communities and look at building relationships with them and take things from there. So I mean, I can speak about one example that I'm quite involved with, and that is an area called Puksabos. It's an informal settlement in Athlone, or was an informal settlement in Athlone. And recently they have kind of moved into low-cost housing. Just the move into low-cost housing, the effect it's had in the community has been phenomenal, I must say, in terms of people's outlook on life and getting people, you know, interested in movements and stuff. And we're kind of focusing on youth, you know, within that community and getting people interested in youth. It's the moment you're talking about children, people's interest, you know, picks up. So getting the community involved from that perspective. So I mean, it's a longitudinal thing, because, you know, it took me about 2 years to build a relationship with that community before we could start getting meetings going in a more sustainable way. Then things like COVID happened, and you know, one is kind of, you know, sitting in the back seat again. But now with COVID gone, we can reapply our minds to that. But yeah, I will definitely be reaching out to you for your ideas and support, because you know, there are lots of resources that are out there, but it's a matter of tapping into them.
Yeah. My next slide is some of my ideas, but perhaps somebody else from another division.
Clint, you want to contribute? Liz, Maggie, Willem?
Okay,
I don't.
Oh, sorry.
It's Maggie. I don't think my contribution would be that life-giving to this discussion, but I think this is an excellent presentation, and prevention.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of cancers are also a result of nicotine and alcohol.
Willem, go for it.
The patients you deal with a lot.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I think, of course, emergency medicine is known as like more of a reactive or responsive discipline. But I think what's important in the case of youth development from an EM perspective is a lot around injury prevention and safety education and those kinds of things that can be really helpful in avoiding the problem or avoiding certain injuries in the first place. And then, of course, we know that there's especially when it relates to interpersonal violence and also road traffic injury and so on, often has a strong sort of link to alcohol use. And I think in that space, you know, emergency medicine is definitely well placed to work on this. I have read some studies where there's like rapid alcohol sort of education and counseling in the emergency center while people are waiting to be seen, if they are not very acute or very emergent at that moment. And that's also a place, I think, where if resources allow, or if you have the right people in the emergency center, that can give some counseling on alcohol use.
I think that giving treatment for alcohol use disorder, and I'll say something about that later, I think is important. But I think we mustn't focus on the rat, the one that is drinking. We must focus on the community in which these accidents happen, in my mind. And I wanted to just say that, Ishak, you talk about the relationship you've got with schools and with the community. I want to second that. The SLAS department, that's kind of the social workers and psychologists of the Department of Education. Their director, Berenice Daniels, has identified a school in Klipfontein, which she wants to set up as a pilot site for this in Cape Town. So it would be important to follow up with her and see who exactly does that work. In terms of emergency medicine, the Premier of the province has kind of recently shifted the responsibility of what was called violence prevention, which lay with the district municipalities, and shifted that responsibility to the Department of Health and Wellness. And it's got a new name now called the Security Promotion. And deputy directors have been kind of appointed in all the different districts. So Steve, oh no, you were there in our office just after our deputy director was introduced or recruited. But I think we need to talk to them. And I've got lots of more other things to talk about. Oh, that's, yeah, how we can kind of engage with community and engage with security promotion. In George, the EC doctors actually get on their shift. You're not working in red area or green area today, but you're going to a school meeting. And I think this shows the department or the commitment of the department that emergency medicine, because they make a huge impact. If they speak to these teachers and say, well, this is what happens on a Friday night at our EC. It's a voice that the teachers are not accustomed to. It's often news to them what happens in the EC on a weekend.
That's amazing.
It's nobody that can bring across that message as good as an EC doctor. And
that's part of their duty. That's at work.
They're at work, and for these fantastic. 2 hours, you leave the EC and you go to the meeting, and you come back and you report to us what happened at the meeting.
Amazing.
Yeah. And the head of emergency medicine came to quite a few meetings, but also the MOs, the Cosmos, quite a range of doctors came to these meetings. A pediatrician came to the school meetings. So there's quite a lot of clinical people that actually attend these meetings, which is amazing.
Isaac's hands up. Old one or new one?
No, it's yeah. So I just actually wanted to say that, you know, this is a model that I think we need to think of kind of escalating. You know, we often have this stereotypical idea of the role of a healthcare professional as being biomedical and only within the clinical space. But I think that, you know, if we could allow as paid hours some non-clinical time, and I call it Ubuntu time, you know, if we can do, because this is an Ubuntu type of engagement with communities, and it can be sustained. So imagine the same medical officer going to the same school for years, you know, building that relationship, and over time, what kind of effects can happen over time, you know, I think.
Yeah, I think all the doctors wanted to go to the school of their children. And just that personal connection of, you know, this is my child who filled in this questionnaire and I want to be part of the solution. It builds community in a very different level than we've seen before. Yeah, I mean, sports medicine, Jeroen, I'm with you that we need to improve on the coaching. And Maggie, I was also not quite sure how palliative care would help, but perhaps you can help with the counseling that we provide at schools. Just a thought.
Well, I could think of ways of using the youth to keep them busy, as maybe that a school adopts an old age home, and that the students then in the afternoons can go and help the elderly. I cannot think of a better way of doing or making use of your time, and then giving them a purpose and a good reason to do something. And it should be relatively safe than an old age home. So that would just be off the top of my head an idea.
Yeah, community projects are very important to involve young people in them, to build social cohesion and responsibility and so on. So I like that. So that is kind of what I wanted to talk about, demand reduction. I want to shift now to supply reduction. And obviously in the mouse cage example, that means just taking out the drugged water. You know, how can we do that? We did that during COVID. You know, we cut the tap, or we closed the tap of the alcohol industry. And I think you all know this picture of Peregrinath on a New Year's Eve. You know, how wonderful does it look if doctors can sit down and drink tea, because there's no patients in EC. And this is possible. You know, we can restrict alcohol sales in many, many ways. WHO has got guidelines on how to restrict alcohol sales effectively in the long term. And we should really see how we can engage different agencies to get this done. And the next few slides, I think, are from, let me just see. Yeah, from a talk that I actually did for the Department of Education. And I just copied them. So there might be, I tried to change them a little bit. But when a learner gets drunk, you know, who should be punished? Do we punish the learner? Do we punish the shop or the tavern that sold it? The parents? The police who doesn't investigate or arrest the tavern owner? The courts for not prosecuting them? Or the community for feeling powerless? And I think all of those, but mainly the adults, and not focusing so much on the young people. The Western Cape law is very clear that no alcohol should be given to anybody under 18. They're not allowed on the premises where alcohol is served. And there's a hefty fine if you overstep that. A fine that could be 1 million rand or 5 years in prison. And at the moment, I haven't seen any establishment having been given this fine. In George, they usually give about 30,000 rand fines for contravening the Liquor Act. But if we report them regularly, we hope that you know, later licenses are evoked or bigger fines are issued. So we hand out these forms in community meetings. The front page, the blue and green, is an official from the Western Cape Liquor Authority, where they encourage people to report illegal alcohol sales. And that includes selling to teenagers. It includes letting alcohol leave a tavern because they've got a license to only to drink the alcohol inside. As soon as the alcohol leaves the tavern, then it can be kind of shared with younger people under 18. Taverns cannot stay open after closing hours. There's a lot of things that one can complain about. And we, as a George Hospital Board, collect these complaints through the clinic suggestion boxes and then present them to the Liquor Authority. And they usually within a week give us feedback of having investigated their drinking place and giving feedback of what their action is. We had recently a community meeting, I think 2 weekends ago. 2 places were named that sell alcohol without licenses. And between them, they've already got 13 charges against them. Police cases for selling alcohol illegally, but they haven't gone to court yet. So there's so many things in the system that, you know, make it possible for them to continue selling alcohol illegally. But I'm convinced that if we as a health department would discuss this with the police and the prosecuting authority, that action could follow. I think we must just follow it through to the end. Especially since last year, the Liquor Authority has committed itself to implement Section 64 of the Liquor Act. Section 64 states that when you do your yearly reapplication for your liquor license, previously you just paid your fee of 1,000 rand and you got the license reissued. But the Section 64 actually says that if there's complaints against you, you must answer about the complaints first before the liquor license can be renewed. Now, when the Liquor Authority went to Khayelitsha to discuss this with the tavern owners, they got threats and they were chased out of Khayelitsha. And it's kind of still a stalemate. They're still not implementing it fully. And yeah, again, I think as the health department, as the university, if we would engage with the Liquor Authority to give them our support in their actions, perhaps they would be more motivated to go back and actually implement this, because this is quite an easy way to shut down liquor stores and shebeens and taverns. Yeah, and yeah, I really want us to engage more with the liquor authority and see if we can close the tap. Strategy in New Zealand, that was kind of dubbed the "where did you have your last drink?" the last drink. Basically, any person that came to EC and smelled of alcohol or had, you know, appeared to have drunk alcohol is asked, "Where did you have your last drink?" or "Where did you have a drink in the last 6 hours?" And that was documented. And then whenever the same establishment popped up regularly, police was called to do a site inspection at that site. And I think we should try that. And they say it wasn't so much flagging these places than the relationship that was built between the emergency room and the police that actually brought about change at the end. When the police start seeing that we're actually serious about shutting down where this trouble starts. And yeah, I think relationship building with the Western Cape Liquor Authority, with the police services as an EC, could help us a lot. I've spoken before about using the EMS GPS coordinates of where all the patients get picked up with their trauma, and linking that with a map of the alcohol outlets and see, you know, how much of the trauma comes from the alcohol outlets, and then targeting, you know, drunk driving roadblocks in those areas where we see there's a lot of alcohol drunk. So there's really lots of avenues to improve on the policing of alcohol sales.
Hermann, it's almost 22. Do you want to take another 5 minutes?
Okay, thanks. And this is now the story that I shared with Department of Education of Zani, that is 14 years old and that is basically pregnant and doesn't fit into a school uniform anymore and needs counseling about the pregnancy. And another child, Tandi, that stabbed a boy in a tavern, and the boy died. After the boy tried to finger her, sexually harass her. And then I asked, you know, what do we do in Zandi's place? We give her compassion. We've got a protocol of what we do about statutory rape. Report to Department of Social Development, an investigation is launched. But Tandi was rejected, was kicked out of school, was put in front of a court for murder. But nobody investigated the tavern in which she was made drunk. And, you know, over the years, I remember, you know, 20 years back, there was no protocol when a rape person came in. And through advocacy, we basically got the Tutuzela centers. We've got a protocol of sexual abuse, how to manage it, how to involve other departments in it. But when a teenager comes in drunk to our EC, we don't report to anybody. There's no investigation as who sold this alcohol to this person. And I really want to campaign that ECs look at a protocol of dealing with this. This is just some advocacy about the Bella Bill. And we, from George, sent 1,000 complaints about including alcohol sales at schools for fundraising. And about a month ago, we heard that now the clause has been removed from the Bella Bill, the Basic Education Law amendments. So advocacy does work, and we've had several victories. So we should really look at improving our advocacy. One point where advocacy would be possible is the upcoming Global Alcohol Policy Conference. And perhaps in the last 15 minutes, we could have a discussion if we want to make any stand at that policy conference or not, and what that stand could be. Conferences in Cape Town in end of October. So do we as a department or as divisions want to make any, engage with community with some advocacy. Hello?
Are you waiting for an answer to that question?
I'm waiting for many answers.
Anybody want to try and answer that?
Perhaps you want to ask me questions. I don't know, but I just thought
Okay.
to end off with, actually plotting some activities that we need to do or that we could be
Okay,
doing.
so that's your last slide.
Yeah. Well, there's one more, but this is more or less the last slide.
Okay, cool.
Hermann, maybe I can just have one comment to that. I mean, as globally, most countries are going in the direction of tolerating substance abuse and legalizing many aspects of substance abuse, particularly marijuana use. And my question is, does that sort of trend not play into a softer approach when it comes to other substances as well, including alcohol? And does that mean that to solve these problems, some aspect of that requires a very draconian approach to substance use in general? Or does that not make sense?
I support the legalization of Dehran. I would also legalize tuk and heroin. I think all the court said is that substances are not a legal issue. They are a social issue. But as I say, we should legalize Dehran. We should have regulations in place as who may smoke it where or who may use it where. I don't think Dehran is appropriate for people under 21 years. I don't think it's appropriate to smoke it on school grounds. So I think even if we legalize substances, it doesn't mean, it becomes like sugar. It means there's still regulations, but we can actually regulate it because it's legal. And in the same way, I think alcohol, which probably causes more harm than Dehran, but it is been legal, for centuries. But we still need to regulate it, and we need to regulate it from a public health perspective. I don't want a complete lockdown of alcohol. I mean, alcohol has got good properties, but we know that there's a genetic predisposition amongst many people to get an alcohol use disorder. We know if people start drinking before they are 21 years, they've got a highly increased chance of becoming addictive. So we need to regulate these substances.
There's Isaac's hand again.
Yeah, I just wanted to hear your opinion in terms of the evidence, where these substances have been legalized and how behavior may have shifted in these countries and also how interventions may have shifted. I mean, I agree with you. It's not a legal problem. I remember working at Paulsmore, and when I did that, a lot of the people that I was seeing were in there because they were in possession of substances. And yeah, I mean, it was, Paulsmore is a very severe behavioral change intervention. I've seen a few people, come off the substances because, I was there long enough to see them come in and out and then saying, well, I am changing. It's not as bad as what it was before. But yeah, just to hear your thoughts in terms of these interventions.
I mean, I think Portugal is the country that is usually quoted as legalizing heroin. And their approach is they provide opiate substitution therapy. They provide counseling, but they mainly try to change the environment in which you live. So when you're found to use heroin, then you get offered a job and the government would pay for half of that job. So it's trying to get people into employment, getting people into housing. That would help much more than a medical intervention or a legal intervention. So I think that's the way we should go. But with alcohol, which is so widespread, where already half of our children use it at 15, 16 years. I think we need to look at, as I said, demand reduction, but also supply reduction methods. And I don't think one solution. I think there's many different avenues from which we'll chip a little bit away from the harm and find protective factors. I think we need to work multifaceted. Yeah.
Dehran?
Yeah. No, thanks for that. I just wanted to comment on a few things. I think that the challenge is going to be for us as FACE and all the divisions to actually look at the data and see what is relevant for the different divisions and how it can be used. I think it's also, I mean, we all know that it's a very exciting model that's being put forward. It's been piloted in the Greater George area. And then, we are planning to go into the Klipfontein corridor as well as into the Saldanha sub-district as well. So there's quite a lot of, unpicking what's happening, looking at successful models, looking at what's working. And I think that the challenge is going to be repeating it as well as the sustainability. And what is great about it is that UCT is not taking a central role. It's a partnership, and how to actually get the different departments to take ownership of the data and the interventions going forward over 3, 9, 10 years. So that is also quite a challenge. But I think that we've already started to talk about what can emergency medicine do, what can sports exercise medicine and so on. Can we have health clubs, for instance, at schools where learners can actually learn how to deal with prevention issues, risk reduction issues, skills to reduce conflict resolution. And Margie mentioned, visiting an old age home, but how do we make them, these young adolescents, kind of prepared to deal with chronic diseases or someone who's actually very sick at home? So I think there's quite a large space for us to move in and create these courses and interventions for youth in communities. The other bit that I think is a big area for us to move in is coaching courses for sports and other activities for community members. We can see the lack of equity in between schools. Some schools, they just hire coaches. Other schools, it's just a very enthusiastic teacher or parent, but they don't necessarily have the complete set of skills to actually be coaches. So I think that's another area that we should be thinking about. And just lastly, I think just a comment on the environment. We visited Pakkalsdorp High while we're doing these report backs, school-specific report backs. They made a comment on how all these RDP houses are being built, and there are quite a number of houses being built in the Pakkalsdorp area, but there's no thought given to any recreational activities. There's no sport grounds, there's no park, there's nothing. So I'm just pointing out how so many different departments and role players in community and society have to be engaged with to actually lead to greater change. Thanks.
Thanks, Dehran. I must say the most radical thing I've heard this afternoon is emergency medicine doctors going out to do a session in schools. So I wonder how you feel about that, Clint.
Hi, everyone. It certainly sounds fascinating. I don't know how practical it would be. It may have a negative effect on the emergency center, and that may balance out the risks. Yeah. Throughout the session, I had two questions or two comments. I decided, and I read a little bit during the session. I'm certainly not an expert on any of these things, but how do we know which interventions would work in a specific? My first question, in a specific environment, is it something that needs to be co-created with a specific population, or is it one size fits all? I mean, I'm imagining building a sports field and then coming there 2 years later and the thing is dilapidated, etc. So and linked to that is it one intervention? Are we treating symptoms, or are we treating the cause of the problem? So is one intervention going to help? Is it the whole? Is it hunger, education, parental, sports, stimulation, connection, etc.? Is it the whole, or does one intervention make a difference, or is it the whole, what do you call it, chain, etc.? And then, and I know Don Pinnock wrote quite a bit about gangsterism and so on. He said even the way communities are built, the layout of communities play a big role. He said there's evidence that, for example, if houses have verandas or a stoep, like they call it in Afrikaans, the social problems decrease immensely just because people are visible, etc. They're on flats, there's no one on the streets and so on. And the way that communities are built, for example, during the apartheid era, they were built they were built differently. I'm not going to go into details and so on. So it's such a complex problem. I have so many questions. I am, but but I do agree that we know that 80% of health it's got nothing to do with the biomedical assistance that we give. So we have to do something. I do agree. Thank you for the wonderful talk.
Social determinants.
Yeah.
Yeah, go for it, Hermann. 5 minutes.
Clint, I think that we don't have to solve the problem this year. We have to give ourselves 10 years to do it. And then I don't think a single intervention on its own will be effective. I think it's what we call a whole of society activities, building social cohesion. As you said, it depends on the housing, it depends on the nutrition. But we can also have very simple, cheap interventions of giving parents advice that if you express your concern about alcohol use to your child, it will help. If you ask your child to stay at home after 10 o'clock, it will help. If you discuss with your teenager, you know, I don't want you to hang around with the guys that use drugs. They might still hang out, but they will hang out less than if you wouldn't discuss it with them. Does one size fit all? What Icelandic kind of our mentors there say is that in all countries, parents love their children and want to see their children flourish. So that is uniform. But the interventions have to change culturally. In Australia, for instance, the surveys found that if you play rugby, you drink more alcohol than if you don't play rugby. So they went and said, what does it come from? Oh, all the coaches drink beer after the rugby trainings. Yeah. So now you have to retrain the coaches, you know, that they should be role models and not, you know, dragging people into problems. In Mexico, the parents say we want to be with our children, but our working week is 55 hours a week. We don't have time to be with our children. So they spoke to the companies, and the companies can now have a plaque of being a silver company or a gold company or a platinum company in terms of Planet Youth, of giving parents time off to spend with their children. So they involve the business community. So we have to find our own solutions. But now we've got very concrete stats that we can discuss with the community, can discuss with the government departments, can discuss with the parents, with the community, and come up with long-term solutions. And to encourage us, this is my last slide. I just want to explain it quickly, then we can have a bit of discussion afterwards.
Well, it's 2 minutes left.
More or less the same time that Planet Youth in Iceland brought down the alcohol levels amongst the teenagers, we had a very significant intervention in South Africa called the ARV rollout, where within those same, from 2005 until 2020, we put 5 million people onto ARVs. 20 years ago, we thought it was impossible. There was no vision of what we do about HIV. And we were demotivated in ECs with seeing all the people coming in with, very advanced HIV disease. And it took collaboration, it took shifting budgets, it took changing the law that nurses can prescribe ARVs. It took many steps, but we got there. And I think if we approach this thing of alcohol and violence from an approach of, let's see what we can do over the next 15 years, I think then there's hope. That was my end message.
It's a brilliant note to end on. I know, Isak, you've got your hand up again, but our time is up. Yeah, I do want to say we underestimate also the thing that's fueling alcohol sales are the profits of the alcohol, big alcohol companies that spend millions on marketing, etc. So we're up against a formidable enemy. This is not just this is not a HIV virus. This is a man-made.
Steve, we took on Pfizer, we took on GlaxoSmithKline, we took on BMS, Bristol Myers Squibb, all these big pharmaceutical companies, and we shamed them, and we took them to court, and we brought down the ARV price from 4,000 Rand to 100 Rand.
True.
So we are used to fight companies.
Excellent. Hermann, thanks for a very stimulating talk. I'm afraid we haven't got more time. I've got to start another session, but thanks a lot, and go well, people.
Thanks for all the participation. I appreciate that.
Sure, man.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.